In 1974, something strange happened at one of New York's fanciest schools. A young man named Jeffrey Epstein walked through the doors of the Dalton School with barely any qualifications. He was just 21 years old, a college dropout with no teaching degree and no real experience. Yet somehow, he convinced them to hire him as a physics and math teacher. The Dalton School wasn't just any school. It was where billionaires, politicians, and celebrities sent their children. The hallways were filled with the kids of Wall Street tycoons and diplomats. And here was Jeffrey Epstein teaching them calculus and physics despite never finishing college himself. How did he pull this off? Nobody really knows for sure. Some say he was charming. Others whisper that he had connections even back then. But one thing was certain. Jeffrey Epstein had a talent for getting into rooms where he didn't belong. This was just the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself for decades. Before the mansions and private jets, Jeffrey Epstein was just a kid from Brooklyn, New York. He grew up in a middle-class neighborhood called Sea Gate. His parents weren't rich or powerful. His father worked for the New York City Parks Department. His mother was a school aide. There was nothing in his childhood that screamed future billionaire. Jeffrey was known as a smart kid who loved math. He could solve complex equations in his head while other kids struggled with basic addition. He played piano and seemed friendly enough to his neighbors. After high school, he went to Cooper Union and then New York University, but he never graduated from either. He just stopped going to classes one day. Years later, people would wonder, what was he doing during those missing years? Why did he drop out? Was he preparing for something bigger? These questions would haunt investigators for decades. Getting hired at Dalton was Jeffrey Epstein's first real mystery. The headmaster who hired him was a man named Donald Barr, whose son would later become the U.S. Attorney General. Donald Barr was known for being strict and careful about who taught at his prestigious school. So why did he hire a college dropout with no credentials? Some conspiracy theorists believe this was Epstein's first handler situation, where powerful people helped him into positions he shouldn't have gotten. Others think Epstein simply lied really well on his application. Whatever the truth, Epstein taught at Dalton for 2 years. Students remember him as charismatic but inappropriate. He would talk about his personal life too much and seemed more interested in befriending parents than teaching children. In 1976, he was suddenly gone. The school fired him, though the exact reasons remain unclear. But Epstein had already made the connections he needed. Several wealthy parents had taken notice of the young, confident math teacher. After leaving Dalton, Jeffrey Epstein did the impossible again. In 1976, he landed a job at Bear Stearns, one of Wall Street's most powerful investment banks. This was shocking because Epstein had no finance degree, no business experience, and no background in trading. He started as a low-level assistant but climbed the ranks with disturbing speed. Within just 4 years, Epstein became a limited partner at Bear Stearns, a position that usually took decades to achieve. He was making serious money and rubbing shoulders with some of the richest people in America. His colleagues remember him as supremely confident, always talking about his connections to powerful people. He bragged about knowing everyone who mattered. But in 1981, something went wrong. Bear Stearns suddenly let him go. The official reason was never made public, but rumors swirled about a bad loan deal and possible ethics violations. Once again, Epstein vanished from one world only to reappear in another, somehow even more powerful than before. After leaving Bear Stearns, Jeffrey Epstein needed a new story. He couldn't just admit he'd been fired. So he invented a glamorous new career, financial bounty hunter. He told people he traveled the world tracking down stolen money for billionaires and governments. It sounded exciting and mysterious, exactly the kind of job that would explain his lifestyle without requiring too many details. But here's the problem. Nobody could verify any of his bounty hunting work. No governments confirmed hearing him. No billionaires came forward to praise his recovery efforts. It was a perfect cover story because it was impossible to prove or disprove. Conspiracy theorists believe this bounty hunter phase was actually when Epstein started working for intelligence agencies. The story gave him an excuse to travel internationally, meet with powerful people, and move large amounts of money without raising suspicion. Whether he was actually recovering stolen funds or doing something else entirely remains one of his many mysteries. What we know for sure is that, during this time, he started building the network that would make him untouchable. In the early 1980s, Jeffrey Epstein met a man who would change everything: Stephen Huffenberg. Huffenberg was a businessman running a company called Towers Financial Corporation. On the surface, it looked like a legitimate debt collection agency. In reality, Huffenberg was building one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in American history, stealing money from ordinary people who thought they were making safe investments. Epstein became Huffenberg's consultant and close associate. He had an office at Towers Financial and helped Huffenberg charm investors and create complicated financial documents that hid the fraud. For years, they worked together, building a scheme that would eventually steal $475 million from over 200,000 victims. These were regular people: teachers, retirees, nurses, trying to save for their futures. But here's where the story gets really dark. When the FBI finally caught on and arrested Huffenberg in 1993, Epstein was nowhere to be found on the charges. Huffenberg went to prison for 20 years. Epstein walked away completely free, reportedly with millions of dollars in his pocket. Before Stephen Huffenberg died in 2022, he gave several interviews making shocking claims about Jeffrey Epstein. He said that Epstein wasn't just a consultant for Towers Financial, he was the mastermind behind much of the fraud. According to Huffenberg, Epstein designed the investment schemes and helped hide the money trail. He called Epstein his uncharged co-conspirator. So why didn't Epstein get arrested? Huffenberg believed that Epstein had already made powerful connections that protected him. Some investigators think Epstein cooperated with authorities and gave them information about Huffenberg in exchange for immunity. Others believe something darker: that Epstein was already working for intelligence agencies and was therefore untouchable. Conspiracy theorists point to this moment as proof that Epstein was never really a businessman at all. He was an operative, protected by people in high places. The $475 million stolen from Towers Financial. Many believe that money became the foundation of Epstein's supposed billion-dollar fortune. The victims never got their money back. Epstein got mansions and islands instead. By the early 1990s, Jeffrey Epstein was supposedly a billionaire. He owned a massive townhouse in Manhattan, a ranch in New Mexico, a mansion in Palm Beach, and a private island in the Caribbean. He flew on private jets and stayed in the most expensive hotels. But here's the strange part: nobody could figure out where his money actually came from. Epstein claimed to manage money only for billionaires, but he refused to name his clients. He said he was so exclusive that he only worked with people who had more than $1 billion in assets. Financial experts tried to track his investments and business deals, but they couldn't find evidence of the kinds of trades that would generate his claimed wealth. His company, Financial Trust Company, was registered in the Virgin Islands, where financial records could be kept secret. Tax documents showed surprisingly little income for someone supposedly worth billions. Investigative journalists spent years trying to understand Epstein's money trail and came up with more questions than answers. Where did the money really come from? And more importantly, was the money even real, or was it just part of a bigger cover story? In 1986, Jeffrey Epstein met Leslie Wexner, the billionaire founder of Victoria's Secret and the limited clothing stores. This meeting would become one of the most puzzling relationships in Epstein's entire story. Within just a few years of knowing each other, Wexner did something almost unheard of in the business world. He gave Epstein full power of attorney over his finances. This meant Epstein could sign checks, make investments, buy property, and control Wexner's money without asking permission. Wexner was worth billions. and he handed complete financial control to a man with a murky past and no proven track record of legitimate success. Even stranger, in 1996, Wexner transferred his massive Manhattan mansion, the largest private residence in New York City, to Epstein for essentially no money. The house was worth over $50 million. Why would one of America's richest men give away his fortune and his home to Jeffrey Epstein? The official story says Wexner trusted Epstein's financial genius. But conspiracy theorists have darker explanations involving blackmail, control, and secrets that could destroy Wexner's empire. In the early 1990s, a British socialite named Ghislaine Maxwell entered Jeffrey Epstein's life. She was beautiful, charming, and well-connected to royalty and celebrities across Europe. But more importantly, she was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, one of the most mysterious and controversial figures in modern history. Robert Maxwell was a media mogul who owned newspapers and publishing companies. He was also, according to multiple intelligence sources, a spy. When Robert Maxwell died mysteriously in 1991, falling off his yacht in the Atlantic Ocean, many questions were left unanswered. Was it suicide, accident, or murder? Israeli intelligence gave him a state funeral, honoring him as a hero. This confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Robert Maxwell had deep ties to the Israeli intelligence agency, Mossad. Some reports claimed he was actually a triple agent, working for Israel, Russia, and Britain simultaneously. When Ghislaine Maxwell partnered with Jeffrey Epstein, she didn't just bring her social connections. Many conspiracy theorists believe she brought her father's intelligence contacts, training, and perhaps even his mission. Together, they would build something terrifying. This is where Jeffrey Epstein's story stops being about money and starts being about power and control. One of the most widespread conspiracy theories is that Epstein was never really a financier at all. Instead, he was an intelligence asset, possibly for the CIA, possibly for Mossad, possibly for both. The theory goes like this. Epstein and Maxwell ran a sophisticated blackmail operation designed to compromise powerful people. They would invite politicians, scientists, businessmen, and celebrities to Epstein's properties. There, these powerful men would be recorded in compromising situations with young women. These recordings would then be used to control their behavior, to influence votes, business deals, scientific research, and political decisions. This kind of operation is called a honey trap, and intelligence agencies around the world have used them for decades. Investigative journalists like Whitney Webb and Vicky Ward have documented strange connections between Epstein and intelligence-linked figures. Multiple people close to Epstein have hinted that he was intelligence without providing proof. Could the entire billionaire persona have been a cover for something much darker? The theory is terrifying because it actually explains more than the official story does. In 1998, Jeffrey Epstein purchased Little St. James, a 75-acre private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. He paid $7.95 million for what would become known by a much darker name, Pedophile Island. Epstein spent millions more building a compound on the island, including a mansion, guest houses, and a strange temple-like structure with a golden dome that became the subject of countless conspiracy theories. The island was the perfect location for secrecy. It was isolated, surrounded by water, and under Epstein's complete control. Visitors had to arrive by boat or helicopter, and Epstein decided who came and went. Local workers who built structures on the island reported seeing cameras everywhere. Some claimed to see young girls who looked uncomfortable and scared. Flight logs show that dozens of powerful people visited the island over the years, including politicians, businessmen, and celebrities. What happened on that island? Survivors would later describe a nightmare of abuse and trafficking. But for years, the island remained Epstein's private kingdom, where normal laws seemed not to apply, and where the rich and powerful could do whatever they wanted without consequences. While the island was Epstein's private retreat, his Manhattan mansion was his headquarters. The 7-story townhouse on East 71st Street was the largest private residence in New York City, with 40 rooms spanning 28,000 square feet. Inside, it was decorated like a twisted museum, filled with strange art and photographs. Visitors reported seeing photographs of naked women covering the walls. There was a life-size female doll hanging from a chandelier. Epstein had a painting of Bill Clinton wearing a blue dress, mocking the Monica Lewinsky scandal. In one room, he kept a prosthetic female body part in a display case. Perhaps most disturbing were the reports of cameras hidden throughout the house. Some visitors claimed every room was monitored and recorded. Maria Farmer, an artist who worked for Epstein, said she believed the mansion was wired for surveillance and that Epstein was recording everyone who visited. If the intelligence asset theory is true, this mansion wasn't a home, it was a blackmail factory. Every important person who walked through those doors might have been secretly recorded, giving Epstein power over them forever. The question remains, where are those recordings now? Jeffrey Epstein kept an address book that would later become one of the most sought-after pieces of evidence in criminal history. This wasn't just a list of friends, it was a directory of power. The book contained over 1,000 names, including presidents, princes, movie stars, scientists, and business titans. When the book was eventually leaked, people were shocked by who was in it. Former President Bill Clinton appeared with 21 different phone numbers. Britain's Prince Andrew was listed. Donald Trump was there, along with dozens of Hollywood celebrities and CEOs, scientists from MIT and Harvard, supermodels and artists. But being in the book didn't necessarily mean someone did anything wrong. Epstein collected powerful people like trophies. He wanted to be connected to everyone who mattered, whether they were actually his friends or not. Still, conspiracy theorists see the Black Book as a target list, a directory of people Epstein and Maxwell wanted to compromise and control. How many of these people visited the island? How many were recorded without their knowledge? How many became trapped in Epstein's web? The Black Book is a roadmap to power, but it might also be a catalog of victims. Jeffrey Epstein loved to surround himself with scientists and academics. He donated millions to universities and research institutions, particularly Harvard and MIT. He hosted dinner parties where Nobel Prize winners and famous physicists discussed their work. But why was a supposed financier so interested in science? And why did prestigious institutions accept his money despite his obvious lack of credentials? Epstein was particularly interested in transhumanism, artificial intelligence, and genetic research. He told people he wanted to seed the human race with his DNA by impregnating multiple women at his New Mexico ranch. He funded research into cryogenics and life extension. Some scientists who took his money later said they felt uncomfortable with his questions and his motives, but they accepted the funding anyway because research is expensive and donors are rare. Conspiracy theorists believe Epstein's science connection served multiple purposes. First, they gave him legitimacy and made him seem intellectual rather than criminal. Second, they connected him to another network of influential people to potentially compromise. Third, some believe he was actually gathering information for intelligence agencies interested in cutting-edge technologies. Whatever his true motives, his science philanthropy worked. It bought him respect he didn't deserve. The first known complaints about Jeffrey Epstein's behavior with young girls came in the late 1990s, but they went nowhere. Parents in Palm Beach started whispering that something strange was happening at Epstein's mansion. Young girls were being brought in and out, some looking upset. But Epstein was powerful, and power protects itself. By this time, Epstein had cultivated friendships with local politicians, police officers, and prosecutors. He donated to charities and political campaigns. When quiet complaints were made, they seemed to disappear into the system without investigation. Epstein understood that in America, money and connections can make problems vanish. He hired teams of lawyers and investigators to monitor anyone who might threaten him. He had private detectives follow journalists and critics. Anyone who got too close to the truth received threatening letters from expensive law firms. For years, this strategy worked perfectly. The whispers stayed whispers. The complaints went nowhere. and Jeffrey Epstein continued operating in plain sight, protected by a system that values wealth and power over justice. But eventually, one brave teenager in Florida would refuse to stay quiet, and she would start a chain reaction that would finally expose Epstein's crimes to the world. When investigators finally began looking closely at how Jeffrey Epstein found his victims, they discovered a horrifying system. Epstein and Maxwell had created a pyramid scheme of abuse. It worked like this. They would recruit a young girl, often from a troubled background or poor family. They would abuse her, then ask her to bring them more girls in exchange for money. These girls would recruit their friends and classmates, often not fully understanding what they were bringing them into. Each girl who brought another victim would receive a few $100s. This created a steady supply of new victims while also making the girls feel complicit in the abuse, which made them less likely to report it. It was evil genius, a self-sustaining system that turned victims into unwitting recruiters. Some girls recruited dozens of others before realizing the horror of what they'd done. The guilt many of them feel is immense. Palm Beach, Florida, became the center of this operation. Epstein's mansion, there had a special massage room where much of the abuse occurred. Girls as young as 14 were told they were just giving massages to a rich man for money. But the massages always turned into something worse. By the early 2000s, dozens of girls had been through this system, and finally, some of them started talking. In 2005, a 14-year-old girl and her parents walked into the Palm Beach Police Department with a disturbing story. The girl described being recruited by a classmate to give a massage to a wealthy man named Jeffrey Epstein. What started as a massage turned into sexual abuse. The girl was traumatized, and her parents were furious. This complaint couldn't be ignored like the others. The Palm Beach Police Chief, Michael Reiter, assigned detectives to investigate. What they found was worse than anyone imagined. They identified at least 34 girls who had been abused by Epstein, with many more who were too scared to come forward. The victims were mostly between 13 and 16 years old. The evidence was overwhelming. Witness statements, flight logs, phone records, and testimony from Epstein's employees. Detectives wanted to arrest Epstein immediately for multiple counts of sexual abuse of minors. They believed they had enough evidence to put him in prison for life. But then something strange happened. The investigation was taken away from local police and handed to federal prosecutors. This is where Epstein's powerful connections would save him once again, in what would become known as the sweetheart deal of the century. The federal prosecutor assigned to the Epstein case was Alexander Acosta, the U.S. Attorney for Southern Florida. This was a high-profile case with multiple underage victims and overwhelming evidence. Most prosecutors would have seen it as a career-making opportunity. But Acosta did something shocking. He made a secret deal with Epstein's lawyers that would protect Epstein and all his co-conspirators from federal prosecution. Years later, when asked about this decision, Acosta told the Trump administration's transition team something chilling. "I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone." He claimed he was instructed to back off by people above his pay grade. Whether this is true or an excuse remains unclear. Under the deal Acosta negotiated, Epstein would plead guilty to just 2 state prostitution charges. He would serve only 18 months in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Jail, with work release privileges that let him leave the jail 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, to go to his office. Even more outrageous, the deal included immunity for all of Epstein's named and unnamed co-conspirators. This meant Ghislaine Maxwell and anyone else who helped him abuse girls couldn't be prosecuted federally for these crimes. The deal was made in secret, violating laws that require prosecutors to inform victims of plea agreements. It was a betrayal of every girl Epstein had hurt. In 2008, Jeffrey Epstein reported to the Palm Beach County Jail to serve his 18-month sentence, but calling it serving time is almost a joke. Epstein was housed in a private wing of the jail, separated from other inmates. His cell was more like a hotel room. He was allowed to hire his own private security guards, and most absurdly, he was granted work release for 12 hours a day. This meant Epstein would leave jail every morning, be driven to his office in West Palm Beach in a private car, and spend the day working before returning to jail at night to sleep. During his work release, he met with lawyers, made business calls, and even had young women visit his office, violating the terms of his release. Jail was just where he slept. One deputy who monitored Epstein said he received better treatment than any inmate she'd ever seen. Epstein's lawyers had successfully negotiated a jail sentence that barely interrupted his life. He served 13 months of his 18-month sentence and was released in July 2009. The crimes he committed against dozens of girls resulted in barely a year of light confinement. To the victims, it felt like justice had been sold to the highest bidder, and they were right. After his release in 2009, Jeffrey Epstein was required to register as a sex offender. This should have ended his social life among the elite, who would want to associate with a convicted sex offender. But shockingly, many of Epstein's powerful friends continued their relationships with him as if nothing had happened. He continued flying on private jets. He continued hosting dinner parties and attending exclusive events. Scientists continued accepting his donations. Some people claimed they didn't know about his conviction, but his name was on the sex offender registry, publicly available for anyone to check. The truth is that the wealthy and powerful often protect their own, even when the evidence of wrongdoing is clear. Epstein did lose some friends. Some people quietly distanced themselves, but many didn't. This support from elite circles allowed Epstein to continue operating with confidence. He believed he was untouchable, that his connections and money would always protect him. And for another decade, he was right. He continued his life much as before, traveling between his properties, meeting with powerful people, and allegedly continuing to abuse young women. The 2008 conviction was supposed to be justice, but it was really just a minor inconvenience for a man who had the system in his pocket. As more information about Jeffrey Epstein leaked to the public, conspiracy theories exploded. Online researchers began connecting dots, finding patterns, and making claims ranging from plausible to wildly speculative. Some theories focused on the intelligence connection, claiming Epstein was working for Mossad to blackmail American politicians into supporting Israel. Others claiming he was working for the CIA to gather information on foreign leaders and businessmen. Some conspiracy theorists believed the entire operation was connected to a global pedophile ring involving the world's most powerful people. They pointed to symbols in Epstein's properties, analyzing photos of the island's strange temple building and claiming it was used for satanic rituals. While many of these theories lacked solid evidence, the core reality was disturbing enough. A convicted sex offender with connections to presidents, princes, and billionaires had operated for decades without serious consequences. The conspiracy theories, even the wild ones, emerged from a reasonable question. How could this happen unless powerful systems were protecting him? The truth might never be as elaborate as the darkest theories suggest, but the real story was dark enough. A network of wealth, power, and possible intelligence connections had created a monster, and then protected him for 40 years. While Epstein enjoyed his freedom after 2009, a small group of investigators, journalists, and lawyers refused to let the story die. Julie Brown, a reporter for the Miami Herald, spent years tracking down Epstein's victims and documenting their stories. Her 2018 series, Perversion of Justice, brought the scandal back into public consciousness and revealed the extent of the cover-up. Bradley Edwards and Paul Cassell, lawyers representing some of Epstein's victims, fought in court for years to have the illegal plea deal overturned. They argued that the victims' rights had been violated when prosecutors made the secret deal without informing them. Their work kept pressure on the system and prevented the case from being forgotten. Former Palm Beach Police Chief Michael Reiter never stopped being angry about how the case was handled. He repeatedly contacted federal prosecutors and encouraged them to bring new charges. These dedicated people worked for years knowing they were fighting against powerful forces that wanted the truth buried. Their persistence would eventually pay off. In 2019, new allegations and new evidence would finally lead to Epstein's arrest on federal charges. But the story was far from over. In fact, the strangest chapters were still to come. By 2019, the full scope of Jeffrey Epstein's connections was staggering. He had partied with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. He had flown with President Clinton on his private jet dozens of times. He had hosted Prince Andrew at his properties and traveled with him internationally. He knew Hollywood directors, supermodels, famous lawyers, and tech billionaires. How did one man become so connected? Part of it was Epstein's personality. He was charismatic and could talk knowledgeably about science, art, and business. Part of it was his apparent wealth, which opened doors in a society that worships money. But conspiracy theorists believe there was something more calculated at work. They argue that Epstein deliberately collected powerful people, offering them access to his properties, his jets, and his parties. Once they accepted his hospitality, they were potentially compromised. Even if they never did anything illegal, their association with him would become embarrassing when his crimes were revealed. This gave Epstein leverage over hundreds of important people. It's also possible that, for those who did participate in illegal activities, Epstein had recordings or photographs that could destroy their careers and lives. This theory explains why so many people stayed loyal to Epstein even after his conviction. They weren't just friends, they were trapped. Even after decades of investigation, the Jeffrey Epstein story is full of unanswered questions. Where did his money really come from? Was he actually a billionaire, or was his wealth exaggerated or provided by intelligence agencies? Who were his clients, if he actually managed money for anyone? Who were all his co-conspirators, and why haven't they been prosecuted? If the intelligence asset theory is true, which agencies was he working for, and what was their ultimate goal? Where are the recordings and photographs that victims and employees say existed? Who has them now? How many powerful people are still protecting secrets from their time in Epstein's world? Why did so many systems fail to stop him? The schools that hired him without credentials, the police who initially ignored complaints, the prosecutors who made the illegal deal, the social circles that welcomed a convicted sex offender back after his release. The official story, that Epstein was just a rich pedophile who used money to abuse girls and avoid consequences, explains some of it. But it doesn't explain everything. The gaps in the official story are where conspiracy theories grow. And sometimes, in the darkest corners of society, conspiracies turn out to be real. This was just part one of Jeffrey Epstein's story, his mysterious rise from a Brooklyn kid to a ghost billionaire with connections to the world's most powerful people.